Hello Year 6 and welcome to Monday the 18th of May, and this is week 5 of term 5. Your LO today is I can listen and respond appropriately and justify my ideas. So we're going to be looking at Darwin today, Charles Darwin. Now at the end of this PowerPoint you are going to be asked to respond to some statements and you're going to justify your ideas about those statements. So just as we do when we're doing reading comprehension and you respond your ideas by looking back at the text, we are going to ask you to respond to some statements by listening carefully to this PowerPoint that I'm going to introduce you to. Okay? So if you'd like to, you go to term 5, week 5, Monday the 18th of May, and you'll see in there statements. You can print them off or you can just make a note of them if you don't have a printer. And listen carefully for anything that relates to that statement as we go through the PowerPoint. So Darwin was born in 1809, and even as a small child he was fascinated by all living things. He was always collecting plants and insects in hedges around his home. As he grew older he went off to Edinburgh University to study medicine, but discovered that he hated the sight of blood, so that was no good for him. Darwin then went to Cambridge University with the intention of becoming a clergyman, but he became more interested in exploring the countryside, and in fact his friend Albert recorded this caricature which shows Darwin on the back of a beetle riding around the countryside collecting insects and plants. Now, while at Cambridge, his botany professor, John Henslow, recommended that he join an expedition to explore the coastline of South America. He'd have to collect all the wonderful things that they would see while they were on their journey. Darwin was really excited about this, but his father thought it would be dangerous. Darwin's uncle wrote to convince his father to let Darwin go. This was a bit of a surprise to Darwin's father because he was hoping that his son would become a clergyman. But eventually Darwin set off with Captain Fitzroy on HMS Beagle. It sailed from Plymouth in 1831. The voyage was supposed to be 2 years, but in the end it lasted almost 5 years. The ship made many stops around the coast of South America. It went to the Galapagos Islands and then on to New Zealand and Australia before coming home 5 years later. This picture was painted by Conrad Martins, who became the ship's artist. I'm sure you remember all about the roles on board a ship from our work that we did on Shackleton earlier this year. Darwin's cabin on board HMS Beagle was small and he shared it with 2 other sailors. Can you see his cabin highlighted here? At night he had to hang his hammock up to sleep, but Darwin was a terrible traveller. He was seasick for most of the voyage. Sometimes he wrote letters home saying how he hated being at sea. On board he had a microscope and a selection of books to help him identify what he saw, and during his trip Darwin discovered thousands of examples of insects, plants and animals, and even rock samples that had never been seen in Britain before. He watched a volcano erupting and felt an earthquake. Every day he was seeing natural things that amazed him, and he couldn't wait to write home about what he saw. He sent back samples in whatever he could find, like these pillboxes, for example. Do you remember Professor Henslow, his botany professor? Well, poor Professor Henslow received many samples that weren't labelled properly, and he didn't know what they were. So he wrote to Darwin saying, "For goodness sake, what is in number 223? It looks like the remains of an electric explosion, a mere mass of soot. Something very curious, I dare say." Eventually, Darwin became better at sorting out and packing all his samples, and they were sent to England by ship. This is a herbarium, and it shows the stem, the leaf, the flowers, and the seeds of a plant, and it provides an important archive about what plants exist, the conditions that they enjoy living in, and where they can be found in the world. When Darwin returned home after his voyage in 1836, he married Emma and he settled down in his house in Kent. He still didn't stop observing and being curious. He would go on a thinking walk around his house and notice things about the plants and the insects and the creatures that shared the grounds with him. He still kept communicating with people all over the world, and they helped him with his scientific research. Some of them, as an example, can be seen here in this letter from New Zealand. They included examples. This one's got bees stuck on it. So, going back to your work that you've got to do today, you have got some statements. They're not questions for you to answer, remember? Statements. So let's have a look at the first one. Darwin knew what he wanted to do from an early age, and so the decision for him was easy. So remember the LO, you need to justify your ideas about this statement. So what I did while I was answering this is I went through the video and I took notes on everything that related to this statement. So here are my notes. Darwin was always fascinated by living things. He was always collecting plants and insects. He started to study medicine but hated the sight of blood. Darwin went to Cambridge to become a clergyman. He was still more interested in collecting plants and insects. I've recorded some words and phrases that you might find useful to add to your ideas. What I'd like you to do now is I'd like you to pause the video and I would like you to see if you can create a statement that reflects all of the ideas that I have found to respond to the statement. So just pause the video now and have a go at verbalizing your answer. That means just saying your answer. Okay, how did you get on? So I had a little think while you were creating your own answer, and here's my answer. Despite always being fascinated by plants and animals and living things, Darwin was not always convinced about what he wanted to do. I know this because he tried to study medicine and he also went off to become a clergyman. This shows that although he was always interested in plants and insects, the decision for him was not very easy. So, just to check that you know what you're doing today, you are going to Term 5, Week 5, Monday the 18th of May, and there you will see 6 statements. We've just looked at one together. Each of those statements you are going to respond to by, first of all, verbally forming your argument. So you will go through, take notes, and then you will construct your argument by just saying it to somebody or just to yourself. You will then note down those arguments. If you feel like you would like to do a little bit more, there's an optional reading comprehension. It's in the same day and it'll be called optional reading comprehension, and that's if you would like a little bit extra to do.